Well, Grantham and Bourne was previously the Grantham and Stamford constituency, which stretched further south. So the new constituency boundary, first of all, reaches upwards towards Sleaford, which is north of Grantham, but doesn't actually hit Sleaford itself. And it does no longer go down as far as Stamford. So it's literally a geographical shift in the centre of the constituency. Because the previous constituency, however, included Bourne as well, in some respects, the change really is mostly at the top, where we picked up more rural villages to the north of Grantham. Grantham and surrounding area, including Bourne, is a rural area, but it also has a historic market town. So Grantham and Bourne are both registered as historic market towns. And I could go on for half an hour telling you just about the history of the area. I won't do that. But what I will say is that really we're dominated by the market town character with our market squares, marketplaces. In the case of Bourne, its areas no longer being used, and the fact we're surrounded by agricultural land. We have the A1 running through the constituency to the to the west of Grantham, and the A1 is a particular hot potato because it's the highest number of accidents on this particular stretch of the A1, so it's particularly dangerous. And also causes major problems with local traffic when there is an incident on it, as you can imagine, and traffic's diverted. So we have the A1. We also have the mainline railway from King's Cross to Edinburgh, running through, stopping at Grantham. So Grantham is an important transport hub for the whole area. It also has rail links to the east and west as well. In particular, Nottingham is a very, very popular a destination from here as well. Grantham itself has a population at the moment of around 60,000. Bourne is a lot smaller. Its population's about 20,000. But what we are both experiencing is huge levels of growth because of targets that the government has placed on the local authority to build more housing. So one of the biggest issues that we've got is that we are a rural area. We have been underfunded against other areas of the country for decades. So we have less funding per person for our health, for our policing, for education, overall for highways. There are very few major roads in Lincolnshire itself. We just happen to be next to the A1. But once you go further into the county, the road infrastructure is quite frankly appalling. It's third world in places. And we have very few health services. We used to have an accident and emergency and training hospital at Grantham. And one of the things I've been heavily involved with was in the campaign to keep our A&E. Thanks to the centralisation of A&Es nationally, Grantham was one of the targeted sites, and we finally lost that battle a couple of years ago, and we now have an urgent treatment centre. So at the same time we have a growing population, we're actually getting reduced vital acute care services, which is a huge concern to the local population. The other thing that's really affecting us is we've literally had a flurry of applications for solar farms in this area. Because the main services run along the A1, what's happening is the solar farm companies are just looking where's the nearest, easiest point that we can actually go onto the network, which I can sympathise with that position, but it's having quite a dramatic impact on what was the rural character of our area. One of the main issues we've got is if you look at Lincolnshire as a whole, including this area, it's actually among the best land in the country for producing food. So what we're arguing, not only is there the visual impact of the solar farms, but we're actually talking about the loss of agricultural land for 40 years at a time, every time one of these farms go up. And we have an application pending at the moment at the Mallard Pass, which we have objected to as a local authority. And that will be the biggest solar farm in the country if that goes ahead. And we have accumulated solar farms that have been granted permission north of Grantham as well. So it's completely changing the landscape. And it is a difficult dilemma because we do need sustainable renewable energy too. We recognise there's that balance. But the general feeling, and this is cross-party locally, is that the government's been appallingly bad at managing the rollout of solar panels across the country. What we could have been doing for at least 10 years, and this is my personal opinion, I'm actually on the planning committee at the district, we could have been putting solar panels on every new build for the last decade, and they've done nothing. Every warehouse that went up could have had solar panels on, nothing. So it's only been, if it's been in the interest of a developer, that they actually consider putting the panels on. Also, other countries are far more imaginative, for example, having panels on car parks. And the other issue we've got is the impact on our wildlife habitat and green spaces, because in effect, that area is also where the development of the new housing is occurring. So the actual agricultural and whole rural character of the area is being transformed by the new development. And if I tell you that Grantham, the scale of development is really quite shocking. So if Grantham's, as I said, its current population is about 60,000, we're talking about potentially 30,000 more people coming to this area with minimal services, minimal infrastructure to support them. Well, I was in Labour actually for 30 years, so it was not a small decision to leave Labour. I left after Keir Starmer became leader. I never liked the labelling that went on by certain factions within the Labour Party ever. I felt we were one party that was a broad church, and we should have accepted and respected each other for that. And I'm afraid Keir Starmer clearly demonstrated he did not respect the views of that broad church, and was heavily weighted towards supporting those on the what I would call a centre or centre-right within the party. I did not like what I would describe as a witch hunt that went on within the party, accusing people broadly of being anti-Semitic if they opposed what was happening in Israel with Palestinians. He still touches on that now, but I think he's had to back off because of what's been happening more recently, tragically, in Palestine. But I thought that the way the members were being treated was appalling. But in particular, for me, the issue was around he lied. I just don't trust him. He is not an honest man. He stood on a platform. I will unite the party. I will stick to the core manifesto that had been agreed before under Corbyn. And I voted for him. And I even gave money to his campaign. Then I find out he accepted money from right-wing lobbyists, and that he basically within a week reneged on every promise that he'd made. And my feeling is, if a man will do that when he isn't in power, what is he capable of when he is in power? And I had to sit back and ask myself, what do I believe in? And my principles have never changed. They haven't wavered. And I believe that we should be doing the best for our people. And I felt that what actually happened within Labour in the last general election was shocking, as the reports came out about how party officials had actually acted against the party, how Keir kept all of that quiet as well. And instead of investigating that, as I said, turned his attention on ordinary party members. I just felt that the party had lost its moral compass. And it was heartbreaking because I'm very mindful that nationally, we still have the attitude from certainly the likes of the BBC that there's really only a two-horse race in Westminster and it's Labour versus Conservative. So I realised leaving Labour was a big decision. I did consider joining other parties. But when I looked at them, I thought actually they've got their own issues internally. We were starting to get locally a stronger a number of independent voices, and I thought, actually, I will be my own voice. I will be guided by my own moral compass, and if I agree with something, I don't need to worry if it's from a Conservative or if it's from someone in Labour, Lib Dem, Green, or whoever. If it's a good idea, it's a good idea, and I'll back it. And if I don't like it, I'll say so wherever it's coming from. The other, I think, area in particular that influenced me, as I mentioned, I've been fighting for a hospital A&E since 2006. I'm very mindful that neither of the main parties actually have got policies that will protect our publicly owned NHS, which I am very passionate about and have campaigned for so long. The centralisation of A&Es actually started under New Labour. Margaret Thatcher's policy of introducing internal market has done untold damage to the NHS. In particular with the cost of bureaucracy rising massively. So instead of 4%, it's now 18% of the overall budget. But also under New Labour, we lost NHS beds. The Conservatives have never done anything to restore that. Labour, to be fair, did introduce more staff. So we had more training, midwives came in, more doctors came in under Labour. But we also had horrendously costly PFIs. We had the introduction of degrees for nurses. So that had a big hit on our numbers of nurses. And generally how the NHS has operated. And when I look now at the manifesto, the reason I decided to stand now was because neither of the mainstream parties is offering a solution for our NHS. And in fact, I think they will make matters much worse. I actually think the Conservatives are clearly not putting anywhere near the amount of funding in that they should be. And Labour's manifesto, I think, will positively cause damage. They know, for example, that we do not have enough GPs. I'm on the Health Scrutiny Committee at County, and we're already being told that we've lost 20% of the GPs in this area over the last 5 years. The current situation is, quote, unsustainable. That's the GPs telling us this. So what makes Labour think putting more pressure on the existing GPs, making them work longer hours, do more appointments is going to be a solution? What we'll see is a rapid increase in the number of GPs who fold up and close up shop and walk away. And that is not good for anyone. And with dentistry, we've had a recent report on that too. We currently have a situation where 75% of our population has no access to a dentist, NHS dentist. So what's happened in response to that is that dentists are basically dealing with casework on an as-needs basis. All work, preventative work that you used to get stopped, and they're dealing with patients who basically are in pain and need help. So when Labour come forward and say, oh, we're going to introduce preventative treatment for children, I fully support and understand where they're coming from, because tragically children are having teeth removed left, right and centre for a host of reasons. But where do those dentists come from? and what happens to the emergency dentist treatment when you've diverted it to deal with preventative treatment. You can't magic up in a year or two those dentists. Their promises also are all around turning the economy around. Well, I'm sorry, Labour, that's just a shameless dodging of your responsibility as an opposition party. That's the same part trickle-down economy, really, that the Conservatives are using. We've got, if you look at the Equality Trust reports and listen to the TUC, we have billions of pounds being leaked out of our economy. I think according to the Equality Trust, 113 billion pounds now is leaking out of our economy every single year because our government is failing to actually plug those loopholes for the top. And inequality within our country is staggeringly high. And you have to, when you're driving around now, dodging the potholes, queuing to get to a GP. I know our local fire services are running on the barest minimum number of safety levels for staffing. We've got underfunding, as I mentioned earlier, for our policing. It's hard to believe we are the 5th wealthiest country in the world. And it just makes me damn angry. I'm sorry. It makes me passionately angry. And to have Conservatives turning around and saying they're going to divert, was it 13 billion pounds away from the welfare budget and give tax breaks to the spread across the rest of the population as a political sweetener, to me is utterly immoral. I think Westminster has just lost the plot. They're not working for ordinary people. They've absolutely no idea what it's like when people are facing heating versus eating, which has been happening in this area. The income in this area is lower than the national average. And our food bank, Citizens Advice Bureau, they're all seeing huge rises in people coming to them for help. These are charities. These are voluntary organisations who set off thinking that they were short-term answers to help plug in an austerity issue, and they've become the mainstay for local people. We've got 1 in 5 in our children going hungry. It just isn't good enough. With social care, it doesn't matter how well off you are. If when you reach a certain age, you need social care, you've got to sell your home. You've got to give everything up in order to go into a care home, which is incidentally what happened to our great grandma in our family. And in the end, the costs escalated so much that had she not passed away when she did, we don't know what would have happened next. That there is something seriously wrong in our society. As I said, the reminder, we are the 5th wealthiest country in the world. We need a strong voice for Grantham and Stamford in Parliament. We have had time and again Conservatives move in here, not from the local area, and they have been careerists working their way up, as they call it, the greasy pole, as they say. They have not had their main focus on these issues. They are out of touch with what's happening in our communities. And it's almost insulting that they quite patronisingly will say, we'll go to a Sure Start site, for example, and might visit a food bank. But they've absolutely no idea what it's like for ordinary people on the ground. And our businesses are also suffering. So they're not either supporting our local economy. I have 23 years experience working, in actually for BT, but working with small and medium enterprises, and they're the lifeblood of our country. They generate the income that should then be going towards the services. We all need those services. They need those services. They need decent roads to be able to transport goods around. They need healthy staff who aren't going off sick because they're not eating. They need to be able to afford to heat their own premises. So we need a government that's actually looking at the root causes of these issues and has the courage to deal with them, instead of governments who are constantly just tinkering at the edges. And if I am elected, I will back whoever is in Parliament who comes up with those policies, those core policies that actually genuinely make a real difference to people. And I will oppose those that do not and that I see can cause harm. I have a significant connection. I am a district councillor. I have been for 13 years. I've recently been elected as a town councillor, and I'm actually currently proud to say I'm actually the town's ambassador. So I am very much a strong voice for the Grantham area. And thanks to my work in the independent group within our district council, I also have quite strong links with Bourne, and I'm listening to the issues that face our Bourne members. They are very, very similar, except Bourne itself has got blessed with a legacy fund which helps them pay for some of the public assets that they have within the town. And like I say, it's good for them. But equally, they are also suffering from threats to their rural character, wildlife habitat. They have some very precious sites. Bourne Wood is an ancient woodland, and the area around it is under threat of new development. They have been very heavily hit already with new development in that town. But again, as I said, I've seen very little infrastructure. So I do have a strong understanding of their needs. With regards to the villages, I was a former parliamentary candidate for Labour in Southwest Norfolk, which turned out to be Liz Truss's seat. But I do have a strong understanding as well of what local villages are up against, and in fact was involved in a campaign to try and save our rural post offices and telephone boxes when I was working for BT, because I know how important they were as the lifeblood of our rural communities. And they are seeing again, the villages are even worse off. We think it's bad being poor in the middle of a city. Try being poor in a village environment where you have no public transport. So how do you get to a job centre? How do you get to a shift unless you have a car and can drive? So it's incredibly isolating. And the smaller businesses a lot of them have closed down, leaving villages that once had the local shop, post office. As I said, they may have had their call boxes, they had the village hall, thriving church. They are struggling. A local pub was at the heart of the community, and they are closing and coming up for sale. They really have their own they've got their own challenges. It's by no means the idyllic lifestyle that you might imagine, unless you are comfortably well off and upper middle class, and then that's a different story. But for the vast majority of people, they are just getting by, and many now are sinking under the cost of living crisis. I think that we need to invest in our core infrastructure for a start. So certainly one of the biggest issues people are facing is a really, really poor quality road network. Just travelling from A to B. I would invest in broadband so that we have parity with the rest of the country. In fact, that is a simple win. The government could easily have changed the regulations to have required broadband to have been rolled out decades ago, and they basically let the telcos off the hook on that. They're making billions of pounds in profit every year, and what they did was allowed them to start introducing upgrades to the network in the city. at the cost of completing the rollout of the network in the rest of the country. And also they're geared up to have competition, but not to actually keep costs down. So what we're actually seeing is an escalating cost to actually being able to access broadband. And interestingly, in a local report that was done, 20% of our population either cannot use or can't get access to online services. That's a significant number of people across our community who are being carved out. And it's more worrying when you think about how many services now going online through the public sector and even businesses and banking. So we've got local people who can't open a bank for a community because they have to go online and they can't get online access. They're becoming excluded. So I think actually broadband provision would help enormously. And then I think we need to start seriously looking at our high streets. What support can we give to those local businesses? And it might be that we help them with, for example, apprenticeship schemes so that they can employ more staff, so they can open longer hours, so they can compete with the supermarkets. That we open up our public toilets, basic things. What does a supermarket have? It's got free parking, it's got toilets, it's undercover, and it's open long hours. What do you get in the high street? Public toilets closed. You have to pay to park, and the shops are shut early. And so we need to be competing. Some local businesses are thriving as well through being online. And that's the other issue. Are we actually in a situation where we have a tax regime and business rates regime that fairly reflects where money's actually coming from? So I could be an IT company working from home, paying minimal business rates, employing very few staff, making a very nice profit, thank you very much. And in the meanwhile, a local retailer is paying business rates on a shop and maybe would be employing 4 or 5 people, and they are struggling to make ends meet and are folding after a year or so. I think we need to completely review how we actually have what our business rates process is, what the system is. It needs to, I think, be far more geared towards the profitability of organisations than it currently is, rather than just if you exist, then therefore you must be paying rates. And then there's another issue there. I found out some time ago to my shock that the reason that supermarkets can afford to have these huge car parks, free car parks, is they actually pay minimal rates on that land in comparison to the rest of the store. So consequently, we're actually subsidising them, competing with the town centres and the high streets as well. So the whole area needs looking at. I also, going back to the agricultural nature of our area, we know farmers are struggling. I will say I did not support Brexit. I voted Remain. We know that there's been a significant hit on our economy. Neither of the main parties are mentioning Brexit now. But if you actually look at the research that has been done, it's been hugely damaging. But for our farmers locally are struggling to make ends meet. And that's one of the reasons they're turning to solar farms, because it's just a way of covering their costs and offering them some security. So I've a lot of sympathy with them on that front, but we should be supporting the production of local food, improved local animal welfare rights, and we're just seeing that weakening. I'm also quite passionate about the environment generally. So to hear almost immediately after Brexit, the government started to introduce the pesticides that do huge damage to our bees, for example, I'd be calling on changes to that too. Our rural area has huge potential for tourism. I mentioned the fact Grantham's on the main line to London. We are an hour and a quarter from London. Going back many years now, I used to live in the suburbs of London, and it was it was quicker to get from Grantham to King's Cross than it used to be to travel through from the suburbs of London into the centre of London. We should be capitalising on that. We've got an incredible history. I mentioned earlier I could go on for hours about the history of Grantham. We've had the D-Day celebrations or commemoration rather recently. Grantham, this area has a hugely important role to play in that. We had thousands of American paratroopers based around here during World War II. In World War I, over 200,000 men were based in Grantham. The population of the town then was 16,000. On top of that, we've got Isaac Newton was based here. There's no national centre to Isaac Newton. It just needs a bit of imagination and it needs investment. We need sites set up where we can draw people in. Tourism is worth billions of pounds to our country. The major share of that currently is going to London. Well, even a fraction of that could be transformative. And one of the, you may not know, but just south of Grantham, they discovered a Roman town underneath the site where they put a relief road. And anywhere else, they'd have gone, this is a really important historic site within the reaches of London. Let's excavate this. Let's turn it into a museum. Not in Lincolnshire. The Conservatives in Lincolnshire instead ploughed through it to create a relief road. But we still have 4,000 artifacts sitting in boxes, Anglo-Saxon, Bronze Age, Roman, sitting in boxes in Lincoln because we've nowhere to display them. And off the back of that heritage, we could have hundreds of different jobs, teaching our youngsters how to be museum curators, the science behind it all, the research. Well, there's so much potential there. Also, because of our location, Grantham had a history of engineering, and in fact, the Victorian period in Grantham was hugely important. We had some very large manufacturers based here, innovative manufacturers. Did you know that the tread from the World War I tank came from Grantham? It was actually invented here. To their credit, Lincoln put a box on top and called it a tank, but the actual tread that makes the Caterpillar tread that made that tank actually was invented in Grantham. And typical, it says everything about our government's complete lack of understanding about business and industry. At the time in World War One, they actually gave the rights to the Caterpillar tread to America. Well, have you heard of Caterpillar, the company? It's just an absolute typical example of how our industry has been undermined by our own government. And I think with, again, a real investment, instead of us having the ideas and then exporting the manufacturing and the jobs to go with them, why don't we start as a country? It's not just local, it's somebody who's passionately nationally. As a country, why don't we start investing in our businesses as well to give them the ability to develop things here? And it wouldn't only be better for the country's economy, is we've got the new opportunities with the green energy, the green services, the green energy are phenomenal, and we don't even have means of going back to those solar farms at the moment. When the panels last about 15 years. We've got no way of dealing with those once they've gone, once that life is gone. And at the moment, those panels have travelled all the way across the world from places and destinations like China. Why aren't we saying, okay, we want to invest in green energy? Why aren't we investing in British manufacturing to produce those wind turbines, etc.? And my understanding is that the last wind farm manufacturer on the Isle of Wight was closed down under New Labour. It's just, what were they thinking? What were they thinking? Our steel industry, if I were in government, I wouldn't have even hesitated to have supported our steel industry. Some of the trade agreements that our government have signed up to, they're not in the interests of our country or in our manufacturing interests. They're in the interests of global businesses who want to be able to pit us all against each other. We should be saying, and this is why I think one of the reasons they pulled out of Europe, because Europe was recognising the importance of saying, we've got these standards, these working standards, these environmental standards. We expect whoever we work with to adhere to them. We've got these standards regarding income and tax. As soon as they started to actually strongly apply them, well, lo and behold, all of a sudden it was great for Britain to leave the EU. You know, that I forgive me for being slightly cynical on that. Nigel Farage, I think, is the biggest hypocrite on this planet. Here he is telling everyone, we must all remain British, wave the British flag. And he's the first one to go running off and getting himself a German passport. Well, good for him. I haven't got one. Most of us haven't got one, you know, and reform really worries me, because they're giving the impression that, like Boris Johnson, that they were like for ordinary people, the bloke in the pub holding the beer and all pint and all that. Start digging below the surface. They are extremely right wing, and if they get in, they will totally destroy the NHS. They believe in the private funding of the NHS. And billions of pounds has already gone into private contracts within the NHS. It's heartbreaking to say this, but I believe Westminster is at its core corrupt. The reason that I say that is because we are guided by the Nolan principles and good governance, and local authorities are more tightly controlled than Westminster is. As a local councillor, if I have a pecuniary interest in anything, not only do I have to declare it, but I can't speak on that matter in a meeting, and I may even have to leave the room. I certainly can't vote. In Westminster, not only I declare I have an interest, certainly, so that people know, but then I can go on to speak. I could even be chairing a committee. I could become a Secretary of State in a subject in which I've received funding. So if we look, for example, at what's happened to our NHS, we know that at least 60 MPs in the last term, and at one point over 200 MPs and Lords, were actually receiving money from the private health sector. Now that includes former health secretaries, and it includes West Streeting and Keir Starmer, who have received funding from the private health sector. How can we trust that a publicly funded NHS is safe in any of their hands when this is permitted to continue? And a simple change of the rules could completely transform how Westminster works. So I've got to ask the question, why is it none of them have changed those rules? And it's certainly something that I would be seeking if I were elected. I believe passionately from our own experience here in South Kesteven district, it is possible for independents to win, and it's possible for independents to work together collaboratively with each other and with other parties in order to do what's best for our community. In South Kesteven, for over 40 years, we had a track record of Conservative councils running this area. In the last the last local election, the district council changed hands to independents, and we're working in coalition with Green Party, Lib Dem, and 2 Labour members, and we it's working. We are focusing on those issues that are most important to our communities. And that would include, in particular, I'm really excited to say we have actually built more council housing, or plans to build more council housing in this first term, and certainly our first year, than the previous Conservative group had in the whole of its first term, because we know how important that is. We also, it's very interesting, when we're all working together, you realise how much we've actually got in common with each other. So you focus on the areas that you share commonality with. There are one or two people who, for example, we've got one or two climate change deniers, but overall, the majority of people are also very passionate about our environment. So, trying to put in stronger changes to protect our environment, we're doing that as well. Our leisure amenities, we're all passionate about protecting those. Where other councils are closing leisure centres, we're all fighting tooth and nail to keep ours going across the whole of the district for our communities. The previous Conservative administration, when Grantham and Bourne faced the downgrade in the last term, they, in my view, heartbreakingly betrayed our community, because clearly party politics came into it. Instead of backing my motion to oppose the downgrade of the A&E, they actually ended up accepting the downgrade of the A&E. And it was clear that even though they knew it wasn't the best thing for our community, they were playing party politics. They didn't want a member of the opposition suggesting that we save our hospital, and they ended up actually backing a motion that cost us it. So yes, independence can make a big difference, and we are a growing movement across the country. And I think it's very short-sighted of any political pundits to not recognise that now. One area that I do feel very passionately about is the need to support our people. It's heartbreaking to see how the quality of life, the standard of living, has fallen across our community. So any policies that come forward that can address that, whether at root cause or other, to provide that support for our households, then I'll be behind it fully.